I'm Shanna Martin, host of the Tech Tools for Teachers podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Erik M. That's right, he's back. And today we're talking about his book, Deconstructing Depth of Knowledge, a method and model for deeper teaching and learning. So much to learn. Awesome conversation. You're going to love this. Thanks for listening. Oh, by the way, before you go, it'd be so cool if you helped out the podcast. How could you do that? I got 3 ways for you. 1, you could tell a friend and share the links. 2, you could go to my website and leave a review and subscribe. And 3, click on the link on my website homepage where it says buy me a coffee. And by doing this, you could donate $1 or $2 or $5 or more to help me, address the costs associated with producing the podcast. That'd be so cool. You are awesome. Enjoy the show.
It's not, can you just do it? Can you explain how you do it? Can you justify or verify with evidence why it's accurate or inaccurate? Can you consider, conclude, or critique based on evidence why you got that result or to basically why you got that outcome?
It's the Education Podcast, your favorite show, with lots of groovy guests and they share what they know. So crank it up to 10 and let your neighbors know that here's another show with Dr. Steve Milletto. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. With Dr. Steve Milletto.
Erik M. is an international author, educator, and presenter with 30 years of experience in education as a classroom teacher, site administrator, education program specialist at a state education agency, and staff development trainer. He is consistently ranked as one of the world top 30 education professionals by the international research organization Global Gurus. Erik provides professional development on establishing rigorous learning environments and delivering educational experiences that challenge students to demonstrate different levels of thinking and discuss the depth and extent of their learning. His areas of expertise include good questioning and inquiry, teaching and learning for depth of knowledge, tiered instruction, authentic learning, differentiated instruction, personalized learning, standards-driven learning, and talent development. Erik received a master's degree in education leadership from Northern Arizona University and a master's degree in television, radio, film production, and management from the S.I. Newhouse School of Public Communications at Syracuse University. He also holds a bachelor's degree in communication and rhetoric and English from the University at Albany. Our focus will be Erik's book, Deconstructing Depth of Knowledge, a method and model for deeper teaching and learning. Erik, thanks so much for being on the show again, and say hi to everyone.
Hi, everyone. Stephen, thank you for having me back. I mean, I enjoyed talking to you last time. Felt really it was a great place to share ideas and communicate with you. You know, I've actually played back our things because just thinking about our conversation, I remember, the reference about W.C. Fields with questioning, get out of here, kid, you're bothering me. So I'm really glad to be back with you.
Well, great to have you back, Erik. And, this is, I can't wait to talk about this. This is an incredible area that you do work in. But before we do that, what I'd like to do is last time you talked with me was episode 700, and I'm a little further beyond that now. And we talked about your book, Inquiring Minds Want to Learn, Posing Good Questions to Promote Student Inquiry. Can you share a little bit about Inquiring Minds Want to Learn? I mean, why do listeners want to listen to episode 700 and read your book?
Well, first of all, thank you for allowing me to be the guest on episode 700. That was a milestone, and congratulations on more episodes.
Thanks.
So teaching and learning with inquiring mind is about how do you teach and learn through inquiry and by questioning with good questions. It's about looking at learning in life through a lens of inquiry and questioning with good questions. What I mean by that is that it's about how do you address and approach things, not only just with learning, but also looking at your life around you with an idea of asking questions. Like the best question you can ask, of course, is why? And that's a very powerful question. When you talk about why, it can be as simple as basically looking out for the facts, or why it can be as complex as explaining, justifying, or extending your thinking and reasoning. So in that book, what I talk about is what do good questions do? I offer a framework called the Inquiring Minds Framework that you can use to teach and learn through inquiry and by questioning with good questions. You start by hooking them with a good question and then go down 4 different pathways of inquiry. There's also a very, very deep dive into how can you rephrase the learning expectations of academic standards and objectives and targets into good questions, how you can get kids to ask their own questions, how you can use generative AI, which is kind of interesting because I wrote this before the big boom of AI when it was just starting to go. How can you use AI to come up with and craft good questions that will encourage deep student inquiry? And it's actually a pseudo sequel to my first book, Now That's a Good Question, which was published by ASCD, that identifies the different kinds of good questions we could phrase and pose to our students. This is about how do we ask them and how can we get students to address them. What distinguishes the book from other inquiry books out there, that a lot of times you have these inquiry books and it's about how to get the students to ask questions. And that's not easy and that's not simple. And this one focuses more on how can we guide and support teachers to come up with those good questions that will engage and encourage inquiry. And it kind of ties into what we're talking today, because what I like to say is that teaching and learning with inquiring mind is the process to have our kids demonstrate and discuss their depth of knowledge. But DOK is the concept that basically demands students to comprehend and communicate the depth and extent of their learning. So this is actually a great complement. So hopefully they listen to episode 700, you'll get some quick strategies. What I like to do is that a shot of IQ, which is inquiring minds, or a shot of IM, where you can learn a quick strategy. But this is going into, okay, so what does addressing those questions, or more so, what does teaching and learning look like, sound like, and feel like? What does deeper teaching and learning look like and sound like and feel like? How can we make it impactful? How can we make it measurable? And most importantly, how can we make it visible?
Awesome. And I got to tell you, listeners, you got to listen to that episode 700, and you got to get his book because it's awesome. And you'll be using it in the class. Read it today, use it tomorrow. Good stuff. All right. So let's shift our focus today to your book, Deconstructing Depth of Knowledge, a method and model for deeper teaching and learning. In the title are the words deeper teaching and learning. What do you mean when you say deeper teaching and learning?
Well, when you talk about deeper teaching and learning, you're talking about, from an instructional standpoint, what are you doing, or more specifically, how are you engaging and encouraging your students to comprehend and communicate, or demonstrate and discuss, or understand and use their knowledge, thinking, and feelings, or learning? So what are you as the teacher doing to basically engage and encourage that? Deeper learning, my perspective is, deeper learning is not just comprehension, depth of comprehension, it's extent of communication. I'm a literacy teacher. I'm a former English teacher when I taught in the classroom. I'm also very verbal in my strengths. So one of the things I often, my educational philosophy is, do you really know it? And how do you really know it? And the way you do it is not just demonstrate, but also discuss. It's not, can you just do it? Can you explain how you do it? Can you justify or verify with evidence why it's accurate or inaccurate? Can you consider, conclude, or critique based on evidence why you got that result, or to basically why you got that outcome? Or can you explore and extend for an extensive purpose? That's very communicative. So what I talk about deeper learning, and we'll talk about this, is that when I talk about depth of knowledge, I say the rigor is in the response. And what I did with it is that I took it and made it a method and model for teaching and learning. More so, and looking at it lately, is that what exactly do cognitive tasks look like, sound like, and feel like? How do we really know that they are thinking at the depth and extent that an academic standard, an educational element like an activity or an item or task, or an educational experience like a lesson or a unit or assessment, demands students to comprehend and communicate their learning, or demonstrate and discuss their learning, or understand and use their learning? So that's how I kind of turn depth of knowledge into that method and model.
Oh, this is awesome. So, one of the things that I got to get you to talk about is what depth of knowledge is. But before we go there, it's interesting because one of my favorite groups, and anybody who's ever seen your bookshelf would have no idea that it seems that one of your favorite groups is probably in the same wavelength as mine. But, Eddie Van Halen was known as being an incredible musician. And when you talk about deeper learning and in that way, I mean, my goodness, he pretty much set the standard for what we think of as incredible rock songs, and just the way you play, and the way that the number of people that were influenced by his musicality. Could you connect Eddie's work with Van Halen to depth of knowledge as we start to figure out what depth of knowledge is?
Oh, that's a really great thing. I really appreciate you asking that, because I am a huge Van Halen fan, and I since a kid I've idolized Eddie Van Halen. And one of the interesting things about Eddie Van Halen is that he is the epitome of gifted and talented. That there's a book that's called Eruption, and he talks about how he has this noise in his head, and he's trying to get the noise out of his head, and he uses music, and he uses sound, he uses his audio strength to basically get that out. So if I had to compare DOK to Eddie Van Halen, DOK one is play the song. Now, for example, with Eddie Van Halen and Van Halen, they did some remakes. They did You Really Got Me. They did Dancing in the Streets. They did You're No Good. They did Where Have All the Good Times Gone. In fact, they were a cover band and then when they first started out, but they just played the song. DOK 2 would be Eddie Van Halen explaining to you how he played songs, okay? So DOK 1 is just play that song. DOK 2 is explain how you played that song. DOK 3 would be thinking strategically or using complex reasoning to play that song in a unique way. So when you sometimes see Eddie Van Halen on the stage and he's jamming with other people, and you see him start to do things that are indicative of his style, such as the finger tapping or doing the scream with his guitar, that's thinking strategically about how I could play this song in different ways and which is the best way to do it, and what if I played it this way. So that's a DOK 3. DOK 4 is you are Eddie Van Halen, and you basically go and redefine, think extensively, or use extended reasoning to redefine how people play guitar and have an impact, not so much an influence, but an impact. Now, Eddie Van Halen did a lot of influence, but really he impacted and changed how people listen to him play the guitar. There's an important point to this, because I'm glad you talked about Eddie Van Halen as it relates to DOK, because if you remember, I said DOK is not just depth of comprehension, it's extent of communication. And one of the things Eddie struggled with was explaining how to play his songs, or explaining how he did something. In fact, there was an interview with his son, Wolfgang, who's now an artist, a musician on his own, Mammoth WVH, and fantastic music. He talks about how his father struggled to explain to him how to play the song. He just played the song, okay? And he goes, well, I asked my dad to explain how to play the song, and he couldn't. He just played it. Why? Because he's Eddie Van Halen. And the other thing is that the thing about DOK is transferable learning. And that's where DOK, when you go through the DOK levels, you're transferring your learning. You're not just talking about it. You're taking in consideration and transferring your learning. So another story about Eddie Van Halen is that years ago, when Guitar Hero was very popular, there was a Guitar Hero Van Halen, and he couldn't play it. And he couldn't play it because the Guitar Hero was different in how he played it, and he couldn't play his own songs. So that's that DOK 3, to where, like, thinking strategically, okay, now I got this different scenario situation. How do I play it? Well, wait a minute. I don't have the neck that I have it with. I bring this point up because there's a lot of misinterpretation about what exactly depth of knowledge is and how to use it accurately and appropriately. And there's this idea that a DOK 3 or 4 is better than a DOK 1 or 2, which is not true at all. Each DOK level, it's not a taxonomy, and it's not a judgment, should not be used as a judgment criteria, that each DOK level has a specific purpose in the learning, in the student's learning, and how students learn, okay? So students do need to just answer correctly or just do it, which is a DOK 1. And we want students to think extensively or use extended reasoning to explore and extend for an extended sense of purpose or period of time. But true learning is, my 2 cents and belief about it is, can you explain how and why you know what you know? And can you justify why you know and how you know what you know is accurate or appropriate or acceptable? That's DOK 2 and 3. So if I had to prioritize the DOK levels, I would say the priority levels we need our kids to hit in a teaching and learning experience, not assessment, that's a whole different thing, but in a teaching and learning experience, we need to have our kids be able to comprehend and communicate, or to simplify it, demonstrate and discuss how and why they got that answer or outcome result, and how or why that answer, justify how or why that answer is accurate, appropriate, or acceptable given the circumstance conditions. So I'm glad you did that, because there's also confusion about with gifted, that a lot of times the gifted teachers are like, well, we got to have the kids do a DOK 4. Look, I'm going to tell you straight right now, the gifted kids are already there. They're already thinking extensively. They're already using extended reasoning. And you know where else the DOK level the gifted kids are? DOK 1, because they can just take a really hard math problem and tell you the answer. But where gifted kids struggle is explaining and justifying how and why they got that answer, and justifying why their response, result, or reasoning is accurate or appropriate or acceptable. So when I talk about teaching and learning for depth of knowledge, don't focus on, I got to get the kids to a DOK 4. It's not about you, teachers. It's about the kids. Can we get the kids to explain and justify why they know, how they know, what they know? And that's what I mean by the rigors in the response, because that is rigorous, not difficulty. Communication's complex. How can I summarize my own words? How can I use evidence to support my thinking, to draw my conclusions and support them, or consider different things, or critique why something else is not valid, or why it's invalid? That's really the true level learning. And that's what I did with DOK.
That's awesome. And I love the description. And thank you so much for connecting the worlds there together, because I love that. Good stuff.
Awesome.
All right. So what impact can depth of knowledge have on a classroom, on that instruction that's going on in student learning, if the teacher understands what it is?
I'm glad you're using the word impact, because that's going to be my word for 2025, and ask, what impact is this making? And it's different than influence, because influence is, what did I do to make this happen? Impact is more, what impact did this have to cause a change? And you can't just point a finger at a person, or that's influence. So when we talk about impact of depth of knowledge, if I didn't call my book Deconstructing Depth of Knowledge, I was going to call it The Missing Link, because I really believe DOK is the missing link to a lot of things in education. We talk about student-centered teaching and learning. DOK will engage, encourage students to demonstrate, discuss their learning, and have the focus on the learning be on them. In fact, what's interesting is, as you go through the DOK levels, the role of the teacher decreases and the responsibility of the student increases when it comes to teaching and learning. Because at a DOK 1, that's completely teacher-led. You're up there like Alex Trebek, host on a game show, and you're just giving information, and the kids are responding back to you. At a DOK 2, what I like to say is the student becomes a teacher, and now the student has to explain and express to you how they know, why they know, what they know. And also, you're turning it over to the kids, and you're giving them an experience to take ownership in their learning. Because if we talk at the kids, some of it will sink in and some of it will not. Okay. But if the kids talk about it, they put it in their own words, now they're taking ownership. So it really fosters and promotes student-centered learning, because at a DOK2, you have to explain it. At a DOK3, you're given a scenario situation or even given the answer. And you have to ask the kids, well, why is it correct or incorrect? Or, okay, here's the goal. You got this many minutes. How could you get to that goal? Or asking what if. So that's a DOK3. And a DOK4, teacher's not even involved. You are just basically gone and say to the kids, you give an extended deadline and say, this is, what you have to come up with, go into an extensive, for an extensive purpose or period of time. So it really helps with making teaching and learning student-centered. It also basically promotes differentiated instruction and individualized and personalized learning, because DOK1 is the teacher, I'm teaching you. DOK2 is now you're teaching me, you're teaching someone else, you're teaching me how you understand this in your own unique way. DOK3 is you have the responsibility to take your learning to achieve a goal in a certain time frame, or strengthen and support your responses, or defend, justify, refute, answers, actions, arguments, alternatives, yours or someone else's. And at DOK4, you're really taking the ownership and doing something innovative and inventive with it. So that's differentiation, individualization, and personalization, and what I like to call dip it. And the differentiation is in the response. How does that student respond? So if I say, fluently multiply multi-digit numbers using an algorithm, which is a DOK2, well, now I need to choose the algorithm, and I need to choose the algorithm that works for me. Now, if I said, pick from one of these algorithms that would be the most efficient and fluent way to do this and explain why, now it's a DOK3. So again, that's where it supports that with differentiation, individualization, personalization. So it's student-centered, supports differentiation, individualization, personalization, but the most important thing is authentic literacy. So we're living in a time right now where science of reading is now the hot thing. We're all focusing on the science of reading. We have our new acronym, SOR, and we have our new thing, when I hope it's not going to become a catchy buzzword, but fortunately the clock is ticking. But we talk about authentic literacy, which actually Mike Schmoker talks about, and again, extending it, it's purposeful reading, writing, and discussion. Every class is a literacy class. There's mathematical literacy. There's English language arts, of course, is a literacy class because you're reading and writing and listening and speaking and using language. There's scientific literacy. There's health literacy. There's physical education literacy, which means that can you comprehend and communicate your learning? DOK allows that because, again, at a DOK1, all I'm doing is answering or just doing it. At a DOK2, now I have to explain like I'm the teacher and use the language of the subject or the concept or the the topic to explain why I know what I know. DOK3, now I'm thinking like a disciplinarian. I'm thinking like a literary critic. I'm thinking like a mathematician, and I'm thinking like a scientist or a historian or an athletic coach or captain or an artist. And I'm thinking of it in a way, I know the answer, I know the outcome result. Now I got to just think strategically about how to do it and use complex reasoning and to examine, explain with evidence my choices. And at DOK4, now I'm the expert. I can speak authoritatively on it. So again, in an elevator speech going to the first floor to second floor, DOK is the missing link. It shifts teaching from teacher-led to student-centered and student-supportive, okay? It also ensures that we can differentiate instruction, individualized learning, and personalized learning, which makes it student responsive. It supports authentic literacy. It's not just, can you think about it, but can you talk about it? Can you take it in consideration and transfer it? And also, the biggest thing about it is that it's standards driven. It's not the activity you do. It's what exactly and how deeply does that standard demand the students to demonstrate and discuss their learning, to demonstrate proficiency? And where are the students on that pathway to proficiency so we can identify their strengths so they can rise to, reach, and go beyond the bar? That's how I also turn DOK into a multi-tier system of support, or RTI. Teaching and learning for depth of knowledge, I say, is you start with the standard as the finish line, you tier to where the students are, and you build upon their strengths to rise to, reach, and go beyond that bar. So one of the things I'm actually discussing lately is that when you get an assessment back and it says the kids are reading at a second grade level and they're in fifth or eighth or high school grades, what does that look like, sound like, and feel like? You got to look at the standard. What does the second grade standard say? That this is what it means is to read at a second grade level. And you start there and build upon their strengths so they can rise to reach and go beyond the DOK level, that standard.
I love it. This is, by the way, you're making me want to be in the classroom right now. So this is good stuff. All right. So one of the things you've kind of alluded to that I want to see if we could delve into a little deeper is, could you talk about misunderstandings about using DOK? I mean, is it always implemented correctly? And always might be a little too much, but is there an incorrect implementation of DOK that might be prevalent?
You know, Stephen, for the sensitivity of teachers and the sensitivity of educators, you really have to think about how you talk about this. You know, to say, you know, inaccurate, to say that, you know, incorrect, yes, in a nutshell. But how do you encourage people on that? How do you speak about that? How do you tell people, hey, for the last 10 years, we've not been doing this accurately. So what I've been telling people is, you've been right based upon what you've been taught and told, but there's new data and information that it says what exactly depth of knowledge is. So, and it's not the fault of anyone doing it inaccurately, because when it comes up to depth of knowledge, you are basically looking at a choice and need to rethink and reconsider, or as Adam Grant says, think again and unlearn, based upon new data and information. So when it comes to depth of knowledge, one of the struggles is that we're up against 60 years of Bloom's taxonomy, which is fine, because that's what we've used to not only categorize the complexity, but also the quality of our teaching and learning. And if you talk to Tom Gusky too, which is actually fascinating, that he'll tell you that, you know, Bloom's taxonomy is often applied and often applied inaccurately. And even my work on it to say the original Bloom's taxonomy was about behaviors, not about thinking. That's why you had conceptual nouns, which were behaviors. And then in 2001, it shifted to cognitive verbs, which talks about cognition and thinking. The big thing about depth of knowledge is that it's not based on the verb or the cognitive action verb, or what we call the Bloom's verb. And that's a cognitive dissonance or a struggle for teachers, because we've been, for the last 35 to 40 years, actually 40 years now, in a standards based system that emphasized, you know, what's the verb. And I remember teaching in the 90s, that's what it was, is that, you know, what's the verb you have up there? And you might remember is that, and we'd have our Madeline Hunter objectives up there. The learner will demonstrate analysis of, and if we wanted to create, we threw synthesis up there. Why? Because synthesis meant create. Well,
yes.
Doesn't really mean that, okay? And then in No Child Left Behind, the assessments were all about skills and stuff, you know, so what's your verb, what's your noun? And that's how we've traditionally unwrapped standards. Depth of knowledge. And when they talk about, you know, not just, I'm going to call them college and career ready standards, because to call them the other CC word, it's got bad branding now, but we'll call them college and career ready standards. And actually, they're now calling them next generation learning standards. What people hopefully are willing to understand is that these standards are not based upon the type and level of thinking students must demonstrate or the kind of knowledge students must develop. I like to say it's not about cognition and content, it's about context. So when you are looking at depth of knowledge, you still go through the traditional method of unwrapping the standards that Larry Ainsworth came up with. It's a great method. But that book came out in 2003 when we had No Child Left Behind standards. And Larry has since updated it, and I have his books, and it's great. And he does a great job of what he calls unpacking the standard, which is about the competency objectives or the competencies you have to get to the standard. But depth of knowledge is contextual. And you have to ask yourself, when you're looking at learning expectations or goals or objectives, two questions. What exactly and how deeply? What exactly do the kids have to think about? And how deeply do they have to think about and talk about it? Or what exactly must students learn? And how deeply must students comprehend and communicate their learning? That's described in detail by the words and phrases that come after your cognitive action verb. So if you do your traditional method of unwrapping standards, circle your verbs, circle them in red, because I'm going to tell you why in a second, and then underline your nouns in blue. So now you know what your skills and stuff are. Now you know what the kids have to do, and now you know what the kids have to understand. The reason why I say red and blue is because those are the colors of an archery target. And I often have to say archery target, because when I say the colors of a target, people go, that's not Target. I'm like, no, not the store. Okay. And we educators have been teaching to the target, the skills and stuff, but our kids are not hitting the bullseye, and that's the yellow. So here's the method. When you unwrap your standards, circle your verbs in red, underline all your nouns and noun phrases that name the content or concepts in blue. And then I want you to take a highlighter and I want you to highlight everything that comes after that initial verb that introduces the objective. Everything in the yellow, that's what identifies, indicates, and informs the level of depth of knowledge students must understand and use their learning.
Excellent. I love that explanation. All right. So you have a blog on Solution Tree. On this blog, you have an article, and it says, How to Deconstruct, Then Reconstruct Depth of Knowledge. Can you talk about why you wrote this?
Yeah, because it's the next step in unwrapping and unpacking the standards, kind of like what I just explained right now. That's actually the process, and I'm glad you asked that because, when it comes to depth of knowledge, there's really three people who are considered to have the level of expertise. I am blessed to be one of them. I am not here saying that I'm not an expert. I don't use the word expert. Expert means I know it all. I don't. I know a lot, and I'm always rethinking and learning. In fact, I was rethinking and learning some stuff about depth of knowledge right before I got on this show. The expertise of depth of knowledge is, of course, Dr. Norman Webb, and he created as a criterion for alignment studies. So you would take your standards, and you would take your activity and assessments, and you use the DOK levels to code and compare how closely they address each other, okay? Karen has turned into a measure of cognitive rigor, where she takes cognitive tasks and she can categorize it in her Hess matrix. And these two do depth of knowledge or use depth of knowledge in a very different and distinct way. Mine is more about DOK as a concept, a framework, a language, and a process. So the concept is you're looking beyond the verb, which is what Karen Hess came up with, the simplified version. And I say you're looking beyond the verb to ask what exactly and how deeply students must understand and use their learning. The process is there's a process of unwrapping standards. I call it deconstructing standards. And you go through that process. You circle your verb, you underline your nouns. Larry Ainsworth's great method, okay? Then you take a highlighter and you highlight everything that comes after that verb. Everything in the yellow is going to be the DOK level demanded. Now, you might find there's another cognitive action verb in the yellow. That's okay, because now you know there's two objectives the kids have to achieve to demonstrate proficiency, okay? You might also see conjunctions. That means there's more objectives in there. You might see commas. That means there's more conditions and cognition or content students must demonstrate and discuss. So it's really understanding what that standard demands. And that's the process of it. That's what I mean by deconstructing standards for depth of knowledge. You go through the Larry Ainsworth method, you take a highlighter and highlight everything that comes after the verb, and then you really take that standard apart. Now, reconstructing DOK learning targets, this is where DOK is a language. And that's where basically I created a basic language system for everyone to understand. So a DOK1, all you have to do is answer. And a DOK2, you have to explain or express with examples. And a DOK3, you have to either justify or verify with evidence or consider, conclude, or critique based on evidence. And you explore and extend for an extensive purpose or period. That's the basic. That's the goal and expectation. But a deeper dive into it is that you would then look and correlate what's the DOK skill the students have to perform, and what's the DOK response students must have to provide. So it's not a simple process, and it requires complexity, but once you learn it, it won't be simplified, but it'll be easy. Because the first time you do this, it's hard. But the more you do this, it becomes easier, but the complexity never changes. And that's the other thing about DOK. So when you reconstruct into a learning target, you just take the individual objectives and you put I can or we will be able to, and then you put the DOK skill in front of it. And that's a specific language. So if I said the standard was analyze whether the information's in the text, that's a DOK one because all I have to do is answer. Is it in the text? Yes or no. The learning target would be I can recall information to analyze whether the information's in the text. Okay? Answer correctly is a DOK response, DOK 1. If I say analyze how the information is presented in the text, now I have to explain. So now the learning target's going to be I can use information and basic reasoning. That's the language of the DOK skill to explain how the information is presented in the text. Establish, explain with examples. That's the response and the success criteria. DOK 2. I can analyze how the information supports the central idea or theme of a text. Now I got two objectives there because I have to analyze how the central idea supports, the information supports the central idea and also possibly the theme. But because it's evidence, I have to verify or I have to conclude. So the DOK learning target becomes I can use complex reasoning to analyze how the information supports the central idea or theme of a text. Sam explained with evidence, DOK 3. Now, if I said to you, I can analyze how two or more texts present the information and how the information supports the central idea and theme. It's not that I have more than one objective. It's that they're analyzing how two or more texts, that context, that condition. For that, they have to use extended reasoning and they have to explore and explain for an extensive purpose. That's the success criteria, DOK response, DOK 4. So the way I teach it is I start with the simple language and I color code it. A DOK 1 is red because all you have to do is answer correctly or incorrectly. A DOK 2 is green because you explain or express with examples. And the examples are the ideas and information from your curricular resources. A DOK 3 is justify or verify with evidence or consider, conclude, and critique based on evidence. Evidence is key for a DOK 3, and that is blue. And explore and extend for an extended purpose is a DOK 4. That's purple. So that's basically an extended version of it. If someone wanted an elevator speech, you unwrap the standards the way you've done it always. You then take a highlighter and highlight everything that comes after the verb and break down that standard further. And then you determine the DOK level using the language, and then you reconstruct the DOK learning target to include a DOK skill at that level and a DOK response at that equitable level.
Excellent. And you're talking about it makes me think about this, which is I got to get you to say this because a teacher's world is chock full of all kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And especially if they're focused on their own growth, they've got to make decisions about what happens, or, they may have to proceed with whatever they were told to do.
Right.
Why should they learn about DOK? I mean, why do you think that's something that they should make that, they put that at their priority list, that it's important. It's so important. Why would you say that? Why would you encourage them?
Because first of all, how do you really know the kids are learning it? Okay, if I answered correctly on all the items on my worksheet today, or I didn't, meant one or two things. Today was a good day, or you had a bad day. Okay, so that's a big thing. How do I really know that they got it? How do I really know they learned it? How do I know that they took it with them? That's the big thing. Number two is there's a love-hate relationship with standards. And it's not the fault of teachers because it's how the standards have been presented to us. I mean, teachers want to teach their topic, teachers want to teach their stuff. And then, the standards, and it's really funny because they just talked about this in The Anxious Generation by, I think his name Jonathan Haidt, that the standards-based movement became more focused on assessment than standards. It's like, how are you doing versus, what exactly and how deeply do you have to learn it? And there's an overemphasis when it comes to standards and assessment. And the other thing is you can't just rely on the curricular resources that have been given to you or pulling that worksheet off Teacher Pay Teachers or going on ChatGPT and saying, I want a worksheet that challenges the students to demonstrate their learning in a DOK3. And you don't know, number one, with AI, what the knowledge source is, because, I mean, AI is basically the synthesis of Google. They take 50 million hits and they synthesize it in a way that we can explain it. In fact, when it comes to DOK, I like to compare it to technology that DOK1's Google, because I can just get the answer, right? AI is DOK2 because I can explain the answer to you. And that's actually true synthesis. I can combine it in my own unique way to explain it to you. DOK3 is HAL 9000 from 2001: A Space Odyssey, because that's when it gets scary, because ChatGPT cannot rationalize, it cannot justify, it can take evidence and form an argument, but it can't take a position and rationalize it. So like if you know the movie 2001, Hal was programmed not to harm humans, okay? Not to lie to humans, excuse me. Hal was programmed not to lie to humans, but he had to lie to humans, but he couldn't lie to humans. So his rationalization was this: wait a minute, if I just kill the humans, I won't have to lie to them, okay?
Very nice.
DOK4 is Skynet from the Terminator movies, who says, hey, wait a minute, I got all the access codes. How about I think extensively and just launch all the missiles myself and destroy all the humans and the machines take over, okay? Or like the Matrix. So that's what's important. How do you really know if they learned it? Communication is key. Authentic literacy is key. We live in a time, and I don't know if I had teachers like this who used to tell me, you need to learn to do the math this way because you're not going to walk around with a calculator in your pocket for the rest of your life.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Well, Steve Jobs fixed that, didn't he?
He sure did.
So the machines, every time the machines get, quote, smarter, or they make what was once hard, simple, easy, we need to basically not only, deepen our comprehension. And notice I'm not saying thinking, I'm saying comprehension, our understanding. But we also need to be able to communicate more extensively why we know, how we know, what we know. And DOK makes the learning not only transferable, but also personal. Because if I asked you, what is 2 + 2? You would say, what?
I would say 4.
And I'd say, you're right, but why?
Because I was told that 2 + 2. Well, because I could show you. I can take.
I can explain it to you.
2
and you
chips
use
and
the language, okay?
Right.
When you say that to children, they say, because I have 2 and I combine it with 2, or I put 2 and 2 together, or I add 2 more to 2, I get 4. So they understand addition. So then I would say to you, Stephen, pick 2 numbers between 1 and 10.
Okay, so do you want me to tell you?
Yeah.
5 and 2.
So what's 5 and 2? What's 5 + 2?
7.
You're right, but why?
Because if I take 5 of this thing and combine it with 2 more of that thing, I get 7 of those things.
Okay, good. See, you transferred your learning. Okay, I gave you the question, I gave you the problem, and then I asked you, what is it? And you gave me the answer, DOK1, but you're able to explain to me how and why you got that answer. So you know addition, okay? So now I'm going to say to you, could 2 + 2 = 5? And you would say to me,
no.
And I'd say, hey, you're right, but why?
Well, because if I take 2 of the thing and add it to two more of the thing, I get 4. And no matter how hard I try, I don't get 5.
So what would you need to do to make it 5?
Add a new rule. Like
Okay, or maybe add one more, right?
Right.
But you're right, add a new rule, okay? So you understand addition. That was a good answer. You know, that you add a new rule. So here's the rule. What if you used addition, decimals, and rounding? Could 2 + 2 = 5?
Most definitely. Probably could make that happen.
And I'd say you're right, but why? But here's the interesting thing. Someone said to me, because when I have 2.8 + 2.2, it = 5. I go, well, wait a minute. What'd I ask you? 2 + 2 = 5, right? And they go, yeah. And I go, well, what happens when I round 2.8? I get 3. So you just made 3 + 2 = 5. What do I need to do to make 2 +? Now people will go, well, that's just semantics. But that's the deeper demand we need to have.
I like
okay.
that.
I will also tell you this, Stephen. You will walk away after this experience and talk about, hey, you know what? I was just with Erik on this and he had me do this thing, and boy, and that's what we want our kids to do. It's not the exit ticket out the door. If you're saying exit ticket out the door and you're not looking at how they're answering, you're just throwing it in trash, okay? And you're not using that to determine what your next steps are in your teaching, then don't even do it, you know? But that's the kind of thinking we need to have with it. Now, on the flip side, okay, don't do it to be profound or confusing. Now, I want to explain this to you because this just happened to me with a school. I was working with a 5th grade teacher, and the standard was about division, okay? And she brings in this worksheet, and it's this way to do division that I've never seen before. You know, we'd call that Common Core math. Is it a way? Yes. Is it a way a student could learn it? Absolutely. Could it be their way? Definitely. And that's why you would teach it. But I asked her, do you understand this? And she goes, no. And I said, good, neither do I. Is this from the curriculum? She said, no. I said, where'd you get this? She goes, teacher paid teachers. And I was like, okay. So then I looked at the coding on top of it, which was a Common Core standard. Now, this was a state that abandoned the Common Core, and most of the states are abandoning or they're tweaking it, which is another thing when you talk about why DOK, and I want to talk about that in a bit. They're changing it, but slightly. They're not transforming or throwing out the standards like they did with Common Core. They fortunately learned their lessons, so they're tweaking things. So they might add some more objectives or change a wording to make it more. So I look at the standard and I find where the standard is in the state where I'm working. And the standard said fluently divide 4-digit dividends by up to 2-digit divisors using place value understanding, the properties of operations, and the relationship between multiplication and division. You got a lot of stuff going on there. But then the objective said, describe the strategy and explain the reasoning. And that worksheet didn't demand me to do that. And that's what I mean. We're teaching the target the skills and stuff, but why aren't our kids hitting the bullseye? Because that explain the reasoning was the bullseye. That's how they really knew it, okay? Now, here's the other thing. So I go to the curriculum, and the curriculum presents this problem. There are 345 kids in a school. There are 15 classrooms. Each classroom has the same amount of kids. How many kids are in the same classroom? That's a DOK 1, okay? Traditionally, what you do is you 15 divided into 345. The curriculum takes them through this process. And the process is, first you have to turn the problem into a multiplication problem. So relationship between division and multiplication, fine. So it's 15 times question mark equals 345. Now I have to use estimation by multiplying 15, the divisor, by multiples and factors of 10. So 15 times 10, 15 times 20, 15 times 30. I realize that looking at the product, that the quotient or the answer to the problem is going to be somewhere between 20 and 30. Okay. Now, since 345 is closer to 300, which is what 15 times 20 is, I now know that the 10 in the quotient is, if you have a headache right now, so do I. But this is what your curriculum is doing. Now, is this a great, deeper way to teach it? Absolutely. But don't just teach it that way to be profound or to be, basically directed to say, this is the way you need to do that. Like the joke in The Incredibles, like, wait a minute, this is how you do the math. That's not how we do math anymore. There's only one way to do math. No, there's more than one way to do math.
Nice
Our
reference.
goal needs to be to figure out how the students can learn the math. And that's why we do it. But it took them through this whole thing. So you can't just rely on your curricular resource to get the kids to and through and beyond the standard. You talk about Van Halen. I can't just give you Eddie Van Halen's Frankenstein guitar, or I can't give you the Wolfgang he designed, and all of a sudden, boom, you're going to start playing Eruption by Van Halen. It's not going to happen. At the same time, you can't say, you know what, Eruption's too hard. I don't know how they're going to play that song. But you know what? I'll teach them Cathedral. That's easier. It's still Van Halen. It's a little bit easier. It's still an instrumental, but that's easier. Or maybe I'll teach them 316, which is an easier instrumental. Or you know what? I don't like David Lee Roth Van Halen. I like Gary Cherone Van Halen. Or I like Sammy Hagar Van Halen. So I'm going to teach them that Van Halen. It all centers around the standard. And that's where DOK can also help us, is that we really need to understand the standard. It's not about passing a test. It's about, this is what has been decided, that it means to demonstrate proficiency in this grade level with this specific subject with this certain content. That's what it is. You don't have to like it. It's been agreed upon. Okay. It's been put out there. Now, what does that look like, sound like, and feel like? Because we're living in a time where answers come free. I can solve any math problem on my phone, and I can go look up any answer. And if I don't get it, I can ask ChatGPT to tell me. So that's what DOK does. It makes the complexity of the learning communicative. And that's why I say rigors in the response. So if you want to use DOK, and you have to choose, because if you're fine with what you're doing, okay, I can't, you can't force people, but you got to say, look, but you got to ask us a question, like, how do we really know the kids are learning it? And you're going to allow a test they took on one day or the course of the week to decide that's how they did? That's a sports mentality. It doesn't matter how you performed all season. All that matters is you won the Super Bowl or the best of 7 series. What if that was the day the kid's parents got divorced? What if that was the day the kid came in not feeling it? What happened before they came in the room? Okay. Can you create something that not only addresses and assesses how whether the student learned it, but also addresses and assesses it authentically? And that's where DOK can help you. DOK1, can they answer it? Great. But that's a hard problem, right? But if all I have to do is plug in an algorithm or be able to read it fluently, it's DOK1. DOK2, can they explain or express in their own words using what their resources or the information you've given them as examples, how they got that answer? That's a DOK2. Can they justify or verify with evidence or conclude, consider, and critique based on evidence? That's a DOK3. And can they explore and extend for an extended purpose? That's a DOK4. What if we could use DOK to simplify what cognitive tasks or teaching, successful learning looks like, sounds like, and feels like in the classroom? How can we make the learning impactful, measurable, and visible?
This is cool. This is awesome. You're giving me shivers, man. I love it. Erik, we're getting close to finishing up. Where can our listeners find additional information, connect, and learn more?
You can go to my website, Maverick, M-A-V-E-R-I-K, education.com. I'm moving off Twitter slowly. That's a big thing right now in every education is. I'm going to Blue Sky. So, if you want to connect me on Twitter, you can go to Maverick, M-A-V-E-R-I-K, edu12. Blue Sky, I'm Maverick, edu.bluesky.social. You can contact me, Erik, E-R-I-K, at Maverick, M-A-V-E-R-I-K, education.com. My book on depth of knowledge is from Solution Tree. And, if you really want to do DOK accurately and authentically, the ones you listen to, Norman Webb, and he does it as a criterion for alignment study. So if you want to know how closely your standards and assessments are aligned to each other, that's Norman Webb. If you want to know what's the cognitive rigor, how rigorous they are, that's Karen Hess. If you want to know how you can use it as a concept, framework, language, or process for teaching and learning, I'm blessed to say that I'm recognized as that. And I'm also designing an AI assistant that basically is fueled by my ideas, research, and work with depth of knowledge, where you will be able to go into it and you can say, what's the DOK level of this standard? It'll break it down for you and use the language I talk about. I just programmed it that I can upload now worksheets into there, and I can say, what's the DOK level of the items on this worksheet? It'll tell me using the language I came up with, and it'll also tell you how closely it addresses and assesses a specific standard, and it'll also give suggestions for how you can have the kids learn it at a deeper DOK level. It's really an amazing thing. It's called Maverick Education AI, no C in Maverick. And I have the beta on my site. I'm going to shut it down because I don't want teachers to subscribe to this. I want districts to take this and create a supplemental tool that will help teachers strengthen, support their instruction, and really know what's the authentic DOK level. Because there's a lot of AI out there that says, oh, we can generate these DOK questions. Oh, we can do these activities. What's your knowledge source? And unfortunately, most of the knowledge source is based upon inaccurate information. This comes directly from one of the authors of DOK. So this is going to be a resource, hopefully, that I would hope districts and schools invest in. And it can do anything. It can create lessons. It creates assessments. It creates accommodations for special ed kids so they can achieve the standard, for second language learners, for gifted kids. It coaches teachers on how to teach and learn for depth of knowledge. So that's really pretty much where, and I'm sharing, I'm not selling, but I'm saying that, this is a complex yet important process, but we have to also be willing to rethink why we do, how we do what we do. You're doing it correctly when it comes to higher order thinking, but how do we really know the kids are demonstrating their learning at the level demanded? That's where DOK comes in.
So awesome. Erik, it's been so great talking with you again. Thanks for sharing your book, Deconstructing Depth of Knowledge, a method and model for deeper teaching and learning. Incredible information for classroom teachers and school administrators. And Erik, it was great catching up with you, and I'm wishing you the best in all you do.
Thank you again for having me on your show.
Hey, you have been listening to Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12, a podcast to help you help kids achieve their dreams. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the podcast network based in Canada called Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio, your voice is right here. The opinions expressed on Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 are those of the guests and host. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is intended to share ideas, advice, and suggestions. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is produced for educational purposes. Hey, thanks for listening. It would be awesome if you visited my website at stephenmiletto.com and connected with me, left a review, and listened to more episodes. And by the way, you could also share it with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues. Thanks so much. You're awesome.